We're going to be kicking off a series and leading through a series called You Lost Me. And this video started to explain a little bit of that trend that young people tend to leave the church between the ages of 18 and 29. Students who grow up in the church, typically speaking, will abandon their faith in some capacity before they reach their 30th birthday. And that's an alarming trend, and it's one that has happened for a while, but studies are showing that this generation, your generation, is far less likely to come back to church at some point than any other generation before you. And we want to examine a little bit of why that is. And You Lost Me is based off of a book called You Lost Me, that I read for the first time in 2012 as a graduate student at Biola, and it's done as a statistician who works for a group called the Barna Institute, who does thousands and thousands of surveys every year to discover trends and what people do and think in society. And I just want to be super clear before we really kick this off. The goal of this series is not to bash the church. It's not to bash ABC Church. It's not to even bash the Big C Church at a whole in any way, shape, or form. We at ABC, we love the church. That's why we're here. And we truly believe that, as Jesus said, the church is the hope of the world. But we also know that over times, the church has some flaws. And we're all people, and therefore we're going to have some flaws. And what Jesus says is that he loves the church as if it was a bride. And he sacrificially loves the church and lays down his life for the church. And so what our goal is of this series is to teach each other and really learn from each other how to love the church and engage with the church and to not abandon the church past 18. And so I'm going to give you a lot of statistics tonight just to open the series. There's going to be a lot of statistics throughout this series. Don't feel like you got to memorize anything, but we do have note pages in front of you. You're definitely encouraged and welcome to take notes either on your phone or on the notes in front of you. But we're going to throw the first statistics up on the screen. There's a dropout problem that we see. And the first is that teenagers are some of the most religiously active Americans. You guys as a whole are the most religiously active Americans except for people 70 and older. So in church attendance, we've got 70 plus, and then we've got teenagers. The least active attenders by far are people between the ages of 18 and 29. And there's a 43% average of a drop-off between the teen and early adult years in terms of church engagement. And in this study, in a 2011 study, 59% of young people with a Christian background report that they have dropped out of attending church after going regularly for most of their life. And 57% say they're less active in church today than when they were 15. So 15 for a lot of them is a big cutting point, and then for the rest of them it's 18. 38% say they've gone through a period where they significantly doubted their faith, and 32% describe a period where they straight up rejected their parents' faith. So that's 1/3 of Christians growing up in the church will walk away off post-youth group, post-HSM time. That's roughly 1/3 of you easily in the room will walk away from your faith after you graduate high school. 71% of those who changed their faith did so before the age of 30, and the majority of people switched before the age of 20. And one other survey says that most people who change their religion will leave their childhood faith before age 24. So that's a pretty depressing amount of statistics, right? You're coming here and we just started worshiping and we're all on fire for what God's doing in our lives, and now the pastor's telling you that 60% of you are going to walk away from your faith. And when we read through these surveys and started looking at what are the reasons why young people are saying they're leaving the church, there's 6 main reasons why young people say that they're leaving. And so we're going to examine all 6 of those throughout the course of this series. We're going to bring in a few guest speakers as we go. And the first one that I want to just talk briefly about tonight is a lot of young people think that churches are shallow. That churches are shallow. And what I mean by that is a lot of people who grow up in Christian homes, to them, Christianity seems boring, it seems irrelevant, and it seems sidelines from the real issues that people face. And some of you have probably felt that way about ABC. You've probably felt that way about a different church if you went to a different church before this. And there's statistics on the shallowness of church that 31% describe church as boring. 25%, 1 in 4, say church is not relevant to my career. It will not help me with anything I do in my future. 25%, it doesn't prepare me for real life. 23%, the Bible is not taught clearly or often enough. And 20%, that God seems completely missing from my experiences of church. So 1 in 5 people that are going to church their entire lives say, well, God is missing from my experiences of church. And so whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that young people are leaving the church in droves? And they have been for years. I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think that the church does shoulder some of this blame. So I'm also not up here to say that the church has never made a mistake throughout history, and that every single member that's been active in a church, and the church has always done its job in discipling and getting people to follow Jesus as a true, authentic disciple of him. I'm not here saying that. I think the church has shouldered some of this blame, but I also think that the individual needs to shoulder some of this too. And for you might have to weigh in your own heart, is it me that is abandoning the church? Is the church actually as shallow as I think it is? And so first I want to talk about the church. Here's where the church has, in some cases, historically struggled with creating good disciples. And here I'm not talking about ABC Church, although our church isn't perfect either. This is where the Big C Church, when I'm talking about all the churches, and especially American Christianity, is that sometimes, honestly, it's presented a view of Christianity that's not accurate. And this is from the adults. The adults have given you a viewpoint of Christianity that actually isn't accurate to what Christianity really is. And what I mean by that is a lot of adults have showed you throughout growing up that Christianity doesn't actually encompass our whole lives, but it's just a hobby. It's a hobby that we do on Wednesdays when we go to youth group. And it's a hobby that we do on Sunday mornings when we get up and put on our nice clothes and we go into church and sit for an hour and a half and then go to Denny's. Not Denny's, it's gross. Somewhere else. But this is our viewpoint of Christianity. That Christianity is this hobby that I follow. And what happens is it separates our faith from real life. So that faith is we can live one life when we're here at youth group, and then we can live a completely different life when we're over here in our real world lives. And so there's two things I think that a lot of churches have done in the past. And that one side is, and some churches still do, honestly, is that one side, the churches present a very superficial understanding of the faith in the Bible. That we've given you from the stage and from small groups, that we may have given you a very superficial understanding of who Jesus is. Like the happy, clappy Jesus thing. That Jesus is here to make us feel good, and he's like a genie in the sky that'll help us with our lives. And while we may not say that, this is what our lives are communicating to you, that Christianity is just a hobby. And as a result, your faith only goes an inch deep. Or we can be churches that overburden you with Bible knowledge without actually giving you any wisdom. We go in the other direction. Well, we've got to teach them to memorize every book of the Bible. And I'm not talking the names of the book. I'm talking the books. They've got to know every word of Leviticus. And if they don't know every word of Leviticus, then they are not holy. Amen. And we sit you down and we make you read every single thing of Leviticus, and we make you memorize all the Old Testament laws. And you might have a ton of head knowledge about the Bible, but you're lacking in wisdom. And so therefore, your faith isn't an inch deep, but it's a mile wide. But it's not deep at all. And so we have a generation of young believers whose faith is either an inch deep or it's a mile wide. So it's too shallow to survive any kind of storm, or it's too broad to make any tangible difference, or to demonstrate that your lives are actually changed by who Jesus is. We really should, as churches, we have to shoulder some of that blame. And we've got to recognize when that we have a job, that when you guys come into church, we have a job to breathe life of the Scriptures. And the Scriptures are living And sometimes we communicate to you as if this is a textbook, but it's a living word. And we have a job to breathe that into you and actually breathe meaning of the gospel into your life and actually demonstrate to you that Jesus really is bigger than a Wednesday, Sunday thing. And I want to show you a couple other statistics, and this is where I think that the church really can step up. This is from thousands of young people being polled about their high school years in church. So again, thousands of people that were in church in high school. 17% of everyone who went through youth group had an adult mentor at the church who was not the pastor. 17%. 20% did any kind of trip, period, or any experience, or just like picked up a shovel once and went to someone's house where they served the poor one time. 20% actually did it. 1 out of 5. 11% said that they at church actually received helpful insight about their next steps in their future and what they were going to do after high school. And 25% learned how Christians can positively contribute to society. That means 75% walked away from their church not knowing that Christians can make a tangible, relational, impactful difference in the world. And that's a travesty. It really is. And so I want to communicate to you from the standpoint of all churches that we're sorry for that. And I think that at ABC, we have tried to go in the opposite direction of that trend. I really do. I think it's been doing this for years. This is not like, oh, Zach came in and now all of a sudden ABC has this to it. I think for years, this youth ministry, for the last 20, 30 years, the youth ministry has gone in a relational side. And I'm convinced more than ever that the church it has a shallow faith problem because it has a lack of discipleship in the church. And so this is it's a shallow faith among everyone, not just students here. But what we've tended to do in youth groups is try to do like a conveyor belt student ministries. And that means we're kind of, as churches in America, we're loading students up on a line and we're thinking we're going to crank out disciples by doing programs. Like, all right, cool. Well, we're going to do this game, and as soon as we do this game, the next time we're going to do this, and the next time we're going to do this, and pretty soon we're going to have 400 students in here, and then they're going to walk away and they're going to follow Jesus forever. And we think that if we do some kind of attractional thing, that all of a sudden that will naturally result in lifelong discipleship. But that's just simply not true. And so what we're having is, the outcome is of people who've never actually been transformed by their faith, but they're just changed slightly by an experience. And not an experience that's God-filled, but an experience that's man. And so I want to contrast this with what Paul says about one of his disciples, Timothy. In 2 Timothy 1:3, he says, I'm reminded of your authentic faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I'm sure, dwells in you. An authentic faith that results from discipleship, from learning from previous generations. And so I think that students, my encouragement to you is pursue wisdom from older believers. I mean, you can pursue knowledge too. You can say like, hey, could you teach me what the books of the Bible are? Cool. You can Google that. What you could say is, hey, could you teach me how to really love God's word? That's wisdom. Hey, could you teach me when I'm having a fight with my friend, how you've dealt with that? That's wisdom. And we want you to pursue wisdom from other believers because these deep relationships are only going to happen when they're shared in quality time and relational time with other believers. And the thing is that as adults, we know that discipleship is a two-way street. We know that we're going to get just as much from meeting with you as you would with us. There's time, a lot of our juniors and seniors are being discipled by leaders here in the room, and those juniors and seniors have started to mentor a little bit the freshmen and sophomores, and I know that freshmen and sophomores, some of you guys are being discipled as well, and so I meet with a junior guy here in the youth group, and every time I meet with him, I walk away completely encouraged in my faith as a result of hearing what he's going through on a daily basis at the high school, the challenges that he faces in sharing his faith with his friends, the challenges he faces in his classrooms, the challenges he faces academically, with trying to balance science and religion and everything else. And it's super encouraging. And so I think what we need to do as a church is not have this conveyor belt mentality of our faith, but we need to emphasize quality over quantity. And again, I really think that ABC does a good job of that. I think sometimes we look around and we go, well, that's just a big youth group. They are a conveyor belt mentality. Just because it's a big youth group doesn't mean that we're not trying to be relational. Hub groups are a really good example of that. You have 30 adults in this room, and we try to keep hub groups pretty small so you can have an authentic chance of relationship building and gaining wisdom from an adult. When we do trips, it's not so we can trot out a big group of students and be like, ooh, look how many students we took to this. It's, hey, here's a cool opportunity to actually put your faith into practice in a smaller setting. And so when we do a trip like Project 805, it's an opportunity for us to serve and love our community the way that 80% of students in church never get to. So the key for growing faith is these God-centered relationships that create faithful and mature disciples that will stand the test of time post-church. Okay, so here's where you come in as individuals. So the church's responsibility is to create disciples. Our responsibility is not to create a bunch of youth group students who have a very shallow view of God and who he is. Our job is to create disciples who actively want to follow Jesus. And I think that as students, a lot of our students, and even some adults, honestly, have a fundamentally flawed view of God. I want to read you a quote. I'm going to teach you a big term tonight, and a lot of you are smarter than me, so you'll probably catch on real quick. But it's this term is moralistic therapeutic deism. Okay, so I don't need to explain, right? So, all right, moralistic therapeutic deism. Let's just break it down. Moralistic, right? Morals. Therapeutic, therapy, right? Deism, God, like a God out there somewhere. This is what, this term has been coined to describe the religion of young people today. Moralistic therapeutic deism. So here's a quote from Christian Smith and Melinda Lundquist. They wrote this book called Soul Searching. So they said, God is something like a combination divine butler and cosmic therapist. He's always on call, takes care of any problems that arise, or professionally helps his people to feel better about themselves, and does not become too personally involved in the process. So we have this view of God that he's like a butler. We call on him when we need him. He can show up. Maybe if we need some counsel, he'll provide some therapy, but he's not really going to get involved in our lives. And that's not the God that we see in the Bible. We have this misunderstanding of who God is. And I think the other thing that individuals as students, we have to own up to is that we sometimes tend to vastly overvalue and overthink what we know about the Bible. If I was to poll a lot of you in the room, I bet that you would say that you were very confident in your faith and your beliefs, and you had a ton of knowledge about the Bible. Some of you would say, man, you cannot teach me anything new, and Pastor Tom can definitely not teach me anything new, and when I read my Bible, it's all the same. I've read these stories before, but I bet that if I actually pushed you on questions, real theological questions, your supposed beliefs would crumble. And I know this because they polled students, and they found that 80% of them said that their Bible head knowledge was extremely good, quote. But what they found is that only 10% of them could answer the most basic questions about Christianity in the Bible. 80% teenagers, extremely good. 10% can answer the most basic questions about Christianity in the Bible. So our self-confidence about what we know is totally out of proportion with the actual knowledge. And as a result of that, plus the fact that our culture tends to really glorify young people. Think about any advertisement you see. So many young people are featured in advertisements and celebrity ads and Hollywood. And so what happens is young people, I'm not saying it's necessary you guys remember this, we're just saying in general here, young people can think that I absolutely cannot learn anything from the older generation. They're outdated. They're outmodeled. They can't teach me anything. And so you're definitely not going to seek out discipleship opportunities if they don't have anything of value to offer you. And you're not going to listen to an old guy like me talk if you don't think that I have anything to offer you as a previous generation. You're definitely not going to listen to a really old guy like Tom Farrell talk. Is this recorded? You're not going to listen to a guy who is 40 years old, Tom Farrell, preach on a Sunday morning, and you're not going to think that you're engaged in that. So there's a reason why young people are staying out of that Sunday morning service, because you're thinking, I can't learn from those adults. They don't understand me. And yes, sometimes we as adults definitely need to do a better job of being relational, but sometimes you as teenagers need to do a better job of understanding that there are things that you can learn from mentors. And so what happens is when we couple these things together, it leads to a faith in young people that lacks humility. And when we have a faith that lacks humility, it's really hard to humbly request assistance or to actually ask something we don't know or to seek out wisdom from godly men and women. If you want to hang on to your faith past high school, you've got to seek out discipleship. Good mentoring is going to help you follow God fully, because here's the thing. Following God fully, especially post-high school, is really, really hard to do. This is what Jesus said about following God fully. This is verse Mark 12:30. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And there's a reason why Jesus names all four of these things. If you're only hanging on to one or even two of these things, your faith is guaranteed to crumble. You will not stand a chance in pursuing Jesus fully once you leave your home. Here's the thing. When he says, love the Lord your God, the word Lord, capital L, means owner. Owner over every fabric of my life. That I must love God with everything. A lot of us only love God with a piece of this. The most common one, although probably not true for a lot of us, but maybe more true than the others, is that we love God with only our heart. We only base our relationship with Jesus on emotional experiences that we have. Like I go to Hume Lake, I end up crying, and Jesus has now impacted my life. And as soon as I don't have a moment that's an emotional experience, I've lost my faith. And there is nothing wrong with an emotional experience. I want to clarify, there's nothing wrong with that. There's been some huge points in my life, in my relationship with God, that are emotional experiences through worship and things like that. But that should not be the only thing. Some of us only love Jesus with our mind. We can know everything there is to know about apologetics and defending the faith and know every verse forward and backwards, and we've got all this head knowledge, but the truth of the gospel has never broken us. It's never actually impacted us and changed our heart. Some of us have trouble loving God with our strength. We've never served people who are less fortunate than us. We've never used our hands in labor to actually help someone who's broken. And as a result of that, we don't love God with our strength. And to love God with your soul, that's what makes us different than animals. To love God with your soul means that we get to choose. Not only can we choose between right and wrong, but we can choose who we will follow. Some of us in the room, if you're really honest with yourselves, you're a Christian because your parents are Christians. Just straight up. You're a Christian because your parents are Christians. It's all you've ever known, and it's what's convenient. And some of you internally are scared that if you admitted that you had doubts, that would be the end of it. And some of us in the room are Christians because it's convenient. We're Christians because it's kind of it's a cool thing to do. I say cool relatively because we know that Christianity isn't super cool in America. But it's not bad. It hasn't caused us a lot of stress. It hasn't caused us a lot of anxiety. So it's okay to be a Christian. Some of us are Christians because your friends are Christians. If you're honest with yourself, you're only a Christian because your friends come to hub groups and they bring you into hub groups. And they're like, you're our friend, come with us. Some of you are a Christian because your life hasn't hit a hard point yet. So everything in your life is just an emotional, like, yes, Jesus, you're awesome. I would love for us in the room to be really honest with ourselves tonight. Why are you a Christian? And if you are, do you really love God? Do you really love the Lord your God with everything? Your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. I think sometimes the Big C church has struggled with helping you live a holistic disciple of God, loving God with all four areas of our lives. Sometimes that we tend to place emphasis in one area or the other. And just so you guys know, in case that wasn't clear, at ABC, we really try to give opportunities to love the Lord your God with all 4 of these things. Here's 4 quick ones. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. We do experiences like Hume Lake and worship nights and things where we can have these emotional moments with Jesus. Love the Lord your God with all your mind. We take students every year to an apologetics conference called Rethink, where they get challenged and poured into and equipped to know the truth of the gospel and defend their faith. Love the Lord your God with all your strength. There's an opportunity coming up called Project 805, where you can give up your spring break sacrificially and serve people who are less fortunate than you and actually be the hands and feet in Jesus in this world. Love the Lord your God with all your soul. If you haven't been baptized and made that decision for yourself, we'd invite you to consider that. That's that proclamation of saying, this is my faith and my choice to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. We're going to sing one more song here. And I want us to really consider, as we think through our minds, well, the church is shallow, the church is boring, the church is irrelevant. I want us to understand, are we doing our part? Are we as believers actively seeking out who Jesus is? Are we really trying to be a holistic disciple of who he is and loving God with everything that we have? Because if we're not, and we're pushing the other way, and we're just going, church, you're boring, you're shallow, you're irrelevant, then we really will be a generation who says, you lost me.